This podcast is brought to you by Raycon Everyday Earbuds. Use the link in the description to get 15% off their best-selling everyday earbuds. And then also use offer code Broken Silicon to save 25% off all Microsoft software at CDkeyoffer.com. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I am joined by someone who really should need no introduction for how many times you've come on Broken Silicon to thankfully bring your wealth of knowledge. But, you know, for anyone who's new to the podcast, please introduce yourself, tell people what you do, and I think as much as you can, because you want to remain at least mostly anonymous, just the scope of your professional work as well, because that is something that I think a lot of people miss, is that you do all of this reviewing and testing, but also you have quite a extensive amount of professional experience in semiconductors and hardware.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So yeah, I'm Michael Thompson. I do the NXGamer channel on over on IGN Performance Reviews. I've been around since the late 80s, early 90s doing computer work. So I've worked in software development and large scale data centers for many years now. So I do a lot of delivery. And now I kind of lead as a lead design architect, so I don't do as much hands-on keyboards and work as I used to. But I've done all of the work right through from old warehouse WMS systems, ERP systems, even manufacturing. So I even did hosiery coding with Pascal and different levels of software development over the years. So I've gone right through the whole stack in terms of all the complexities and everything else that goes on. But one of my biggest challenges has always been around trying to make sure that I stay ahead of the game. And that's one of the reasons why I do the channel that I do, because I always like to learn new technologies, learn new features. And I was keen in doing things like VMware back in the 90s. I was one of the first people to start delivering that in large-scale environments, enterprise environments, places like M&S, banks. So I did a lot of data center migrations, P2V migrations, so things like that. And over the years, I've just got loads of experience in delivering. So now I kind of use a lot of my skill set to adapt to what game technology is. And fundamentally, there's not a lot in it. And I think that's where I bring my specific view of the thing, because I've lived and breathed the commercial workspace, as you have, working for the car industry. So it's a very different view of the world when you know the commercial back end side of it, and you don't just look at it from the fan of the technology, because never the twain shall meet. As you know, it's not always the best solution, isn't always the most commercially viable one. So I think that kind of sums up my expertise. I don't like using the word expertise. My experience, sorry.
I'll use the word expertise even if you won't. But it's funny you mentioned, I used to work at General Motors, and at this point that was, and then my account manager position I held, that I don't say where it was just for personal, anonymity reasons, you know. Mm-hmm. But like, all of that professional life I had in the automotive industry at this point, I believe was 5 years ago. Actually, yeah, pretty much to the day, when I started doing this full time. And even though it was 5 years ago, having that little bit in the corporate world and the technology world, I still reference so many things from that when I think about what could be going on in the background, because I think this is such a blind spot to a lot of creators. You know, it doesn't matter really what you did before you did YouTube full time. If you're one of those people, you know, you could have been a lawyer, which some people were actually that I know, or you could, you know, work at a grocery store. It doesn't really matter. But like, if you've worked in the technology world, it removes so many blind spots to bad takes. Like, you know, oh, well, why would they, you know, and I see this too with some car people too. Like, you know, how could they make this mistake? Like, how could they miss this? And it's like, you don't understand how complicated this is, nor how much time it goes into this. I'll give you 10 examples of how this could have happened that isn't they're lazy or greedy, and that's just it, right?
Mm-hmm. No, spot on. Absolutely spot on. I think it's always good to have that level of experience on both sides of the fence, and also just seeing why decisions are made. Like you say, it's never one single decision. It's always a convolution thereof, and balancing a delivery in terms of all the hard ache of delivering timescales, commercial markets, what's viable, route to market, whether or not you've got other solutions that come in place. There's lots and lots of things that add up. And like you say, a lot of people that cover the tech industry do tend to see it from a very funnel point of view, right or wrongly. I'm not saying that's bad. It's just sometimes it's good to have that wider experience because it does open your eyes a little bit. So yeah, I agree. It's good.
All right, so let's get right into the thing that we hastily did a bunch of research on and made sure we understood the full scope of the reveal of before we started recording, like literally like 20 minutes before we started recording, everybody. I guess it was Microsoft announced the Xbox Ally X made by Asus. And I think this is interesting. We can get into a lot of that back decision making behind the scenes type of stuff right now, because recently there was a story that came out that there, I believe, was supposedly some only Xbox handheld that was sidelined in favor of supporting other Xbox or other really Windows handhelds. And now we've seen very quickly after that rumor came out that the Xbox Ally X was announced. And I'll just say the specs quick. I mean, it has a Z2 Extreme, so really off-the-shelf part from AMD, which is 3 Zen 5 cores, 5 Zen 5C cores, 16 RDNA 3.5 compute units. Fundamentally, everybody, this is just a Strix Point chip with a different voltage curve and bin to perform best at low energy with a few cores disabled. 24 gigabytes of RAM, 1 terabyte SSD, 1080p 120 hertz VRR screen. I believe that's what the ROG Ally already has, I think. And I guess really the most interesting thing to me, because all of this, again, off-the-shelf parts, but what isn't off the shelf is supposedly there's some bootable Xbox kind of OS-like experience you can go into that unifies your Windows library. So it seems this must just be running a version of Windows 11. But I saw something online already where Xbox was claiming, or I guess Microsoft Xbox, whatever you want to call them, was claiming that they saved 2 gigabytes on RAM usage using this Xbox mode. And this was influenced by the Xbox team bringing Xbox OS type stuff to a version of Windows that this handheld will run. My gut reaction is, tell me the price. I mean, if it's $1,000, it's probably the best handheld, but it's expensive. If it's $600, I think this is a interesting entrant into the market. But what do you think about the Xbox handheld? What's going on with the Xbox and just this piece of hardware in general?
Yeah, like you say, it's a bit of a curveball because I didn't see this coming today. So this is all hot off the press. But fundamentally, this is something I've been saying for many, many years on my channel. And I think I even mentioned it here before. This is Microsoft's next direction, which is they have to minimize the cost. Xbox doesn't make money. The value add that Xbox delivers isn't a commercially viable console solution anymore. So they've pivoted away from that. Game Pass is this solution that has become their drive for multi-platform. And this is the next step in that, which is fundamentally this is around getting rid of the costly hardware manufacturing side and creating a market for themselves that allows it to be a strategic partnership and then IP licensed out to manufacturers. So Asus is the start, but other manufacturers will jump on board if it's successful. And this is fundamentally for them to try and to deliver a solution where they can continue to deliver a marketplace to sell their games. So, they're the biggest publisher now in the game space. So they're not giving up on games. This is just another route to market, and they're going to have to manufacture that and maintain it. Mobile gaming is getting more and more popular. Obviously, the Switch started it. The Steam Deck has been incredibly popular in the PC space. Asus has been around with their ROG Ally for a while, so it made a good sense of this partnership jumping on board and them delivering it. It does feel as if the fact that the rumours that they've cancelled their own internal one, which is not a surprise. My assumption was they would do that first, create a market, and then get other partners to jump on board. What's probably happened is their level of subsidy or ROI with the deal with Asus has become slightly more beneficial to them, both on maybe bottom line or certainly in market value. So they're probably licensing this out at a decent rate to see how it delivers. And obviously they've got good partnerships with AMD, hence why they've probably secured the hardware themselves indirectly with a deal with ROG Ally. They're probably a much better partner than a ROG Ally would ever be in terms of Asus. So it makes sense they're probably getting better value on the hardware from AMD than ROG would get themselves, or Asus would get themselves. So I would say this is a classic strategic partnership, as I always mention in lots of my channels, which is around there's a market for all of them. It will drive bigger sales for the ROG value in terms of Asus. They'll get a benefit from it because more people will jump on it. A lot of console people that weren't interested will jump on board. And Xbox get another route to market. Now, the bit that they mentioned around the Xbox app, it's the Xbox app. it's very easy to save space and memory on Windows because Windows is rubbish, and I say this all the time. It's incredibly aggressive on memory allocation. That's the biggest weakness of Windows. It just keeps everything in a cache all the time. Even your operating system, just use your PC for longer than a few hours, and you'll see the save state that eats into your hard drive space. So they've probably have definitely leaned into the fact that the Xbox team and probably the Surface team, because they do run slightly better, have leaned into the architecture in terms of the design and the software side. And this is just big picture mode. It's nothing more than that. It's getting on board with the competition they can see, which is SteamOS. Microsoft's biggest concern is not around getting more games to market. It's around not losing the footprint they've got in the PC space. Now, if they get competition from SteamOS, which is getting more and more, I mean, obviously it's jumped onto, was it the ROG that did, was it the ROG Z1?
I believe the Legion Go was one of them. And I think, yes, the ROG Ally or something was something to finally get SteamOS, which should really scare Microsoft.
And it has. And this is it. This is them running scared. And I said this a few months ago on one of my database videos, which is this is exactly what they see. This is them stopping that bleed that's happening. Because once SteamOS becomes a viable solution for everyone to play their games in the PC space, and then you've got this huge new market opening up in mobile, people are going to divert from Windows. And Windows already got its own problems. It doesn't need a competition coming in from Valve that is much better, more effective. And it actually, in reality, can run games better than native Windows apps. I did a video recently for Cyberpunk where I've did a dual boot on my Steam Deck, and you can lose like 70% better performance using SteamOS than you can using Windows 11 on that exact same hardware. Now, there's all the caveats of driver and all that issue as well, because it's not exactly a like-for-like ideal situation. But I think this is Microsoft being astutely aware that they're under threat. And their threat is not just SteamOS. That's their biggest threat, but it's also the other competition. You mentioned it in your chat, but PS5 and their mobile solution, Steam, it's not Steam, Switch and Nintendo Switch 2. There's this drive to get away from gaming on PC. So they've got to kind of cover their bases. And this is a perfect example. It's actually good strategic management. It's the fact that they're looking at it from both ends of the market, thinking, okay, we'll get a handheld out there that runs PC, so therefore we'll expand our user base. But in addition to that, we'll also try and improve it so people get a better experience from Xbox/Windows, and they can use it to improve their quality experience. So that's what I think it is. Long-winded answer, but hopefully useful.
So, I think, how much of this, too, do you think is they just ran the numbers and they're like, if this is an Xbox console that handheld, we project 5 to 10 million sales. Fundamentally, we want 20 plus for this to be profitable as a solely in-house venture, right? And then they saw that the ROG Ally, and I suspect they found that the work the Xbox software team was doing was yielding kind of what they were going to get to anyways if they built it themselves. And they said, yeah, look, we know this won't sell enough for us to build it in-house, and so we have to do this. How much do you think it's that? And how much do you think it is just this, I guess it's probably both, right? This general pivot to we're asleep at the wheel again. Valve might be about to eat a significant portion of our operating system market share. And I have to say this too. Every guest I have on is fed up with Windows. Wendell from Level 1 Techs was just on. Like, everyone's fed up with Windows, and maybe Microsoft's eventually hearing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's never been great for many, many years. I think last time it was great was XP. Beyond that, and in fact, even now, a lot of things from XP are still in the operating system. That's you can't really.
I know when I check my audio, I still have to go to audio settings and then more settings, and it still brings up that old. Just let me go to that without clicking through 5 Windows 11 menus, guys. I mean, come on.
Yeah, abstraction. That sums up Windows' problem. That's Microsoft's problem as a whole. They have driven themselves away from that low level hardware, or at least having technical people in the software development. They're not driven by that anymore. They're not a tech driven company. They're a market driven company, and that's what changes that. And that's happened with a lot of companies. Going back to your point, though, I think that this is definitely both. This is Microsoft looking at the bottom line and saying, ROG are going one way and they're coming towards us. We've got a plan. We're going towards them. And I think it's literally the numbers game. Somebody sat there and said, just doesn't make financial sense. But what does make sense is if we share the load we get together and we do a service integration plan with ROG and our own internal teams, and then they can cut costs, so they can remove people from their own internal teams. Asus gets some subsidy from Microsoft to do the work from their side, and both sides benefit from this huge buzz that will come out of this Xbox handheld, and therefore both parties get a benefit from it. But I wouldn't say it's a last-ditch attempt, but I think all eyes will be on the success of this from both sides of the fence. Is it going to work? Is it not? And they may yet again pivot from this, but fingers crossed it will actually land good enough to make an impact, because I'm a big advocate for competition. So if it drives Xbox development team driving a better gamer experience in Windows, then it's a win-win, I think. But we'll see what happens when it lands and how good it actually is. I think this will be a stepping stone. I don't expect Steam OS levels just yet.
Yeah, and I want to make an aside here too, because we're starting this conversation talking about how this Xbox handheld, it's really just a Windows handheld, is kind of the final proof you need that Microsoft is pivoting away from truly being in the console business. And that's not like we're talking about that because that's true. Look, whether you like it or not, that's true. And I think there's a lot of people that will go, well, it sounds like you're happy about that, and that means you don't want more competition and you're a fanboy. Always that's the way of thinking of some people. And I think what I would say to them is Xbox isn't competing with Sony anymore. Like Sony is just turned into a remaster factory where they're selling their new Pro console for $700 without a disc drive. We're Microsoft to have a third of the market share, or I don't even know what % of the software console sales they have. It's not a third. Like, were they to be competing, Sony wouldn't have charged $700 for the Pro. And so even if it's not a traditional console, they're not helping the market right now anyways. There is no competition coming from the Xbox side. PlayStation acts like they don't exist, and so does Nintendo. And so we're talking about this reality because we think maybe if Windows and Xbox like Windows gaming devices were more competitive, that would bring more competition to Sony than anything Xbox is doing right now. So you should be rooting for this to work, because what Xbox has been doing for the past 2 gens has not worked. And that's why the PlayStation 5 Pro is $700. It's all the proof you need. But I have to do that normal fanboy warning disclaimer thing just to clarify where we're coming from. Moving forward, though, I have a big question about this, though. I've noticed that there's going to have a unified launcher thing. Undoubtedly, I would suspect that they'll let you buy and launch anything you want, but what they're going to do is, I think what their hope is it's like, oh, I want to play, I don't know, Expedition 33. You search Expedition 33 in their unified launcher, it will try to have you buy it from the Xbox store before you buy it from Steam, right? And they're probably throwing in the flag, right, on throwing in the towel on trying to beat Steam. But maybe they're hoping, and this sounds a harsh way to put it, to leech off of some of the Steam players that might just buy it through their own storefront anyways. And they've accepted they're never going to beat Steam, but if they can get 10, 20% of Steam sales, that's way more money being made than they were before. So I want to know if you agree with that. And then I'm also curious what you think the price could be, like how much you think they really could subsidize this, because Valve subsidizes the Steam Deck because they make a ton of Steam sales, so it's worth selling it for barely a profit. But I wonder if you think Microsoft would be that aggressive.
Yeah, I think they'll do that. I think a sideload Steam is almost certainty. They can't ignore that market; it's too big. I think they'll definitely subsidize that market. So a little bit like EA do, where you can buy a game through Steam, but it still forces you to load the friggin' EA app, whatever it is, what it's called now. It used to be called,
I think it is just called the EA app now.
The EA app, yeah. So you can get the game slightly cheaper on Steam, and therefore it still forces you through it. They'll probably do that, where they'll offer discounts with games that they release, put them on Steam, and therefore launch it through. But the other big benefit that they're going to get here is, and this is the thing, they can actually now get people to play PlayStation exclusives on an Xbox, because if you've got the Steam app, you can play all the PC Steam games, and they'll absolutely advertise that. They'll say you can play Spider-Man, it'll play this, it'll play that. So all of the market of all of these Sony games that are on there, they can then sideload through Xbox, and that's another thing that they can lean into, because then it will create this whole argument about there's no longer exclusives because we've got an Xbox and it's playing PlayStation games. So I think that's also part of their marketing strategy. But I think price-wise, Will they subsidize it? I don't know. I don't think they will, because I think the shareholders in Microsoft are very nervous around where Xbox is at. The money that they've spent, the money that they've chucked into or taken out the coffers in terms of Activision and Bethesda, that ZeniMax, that has really kind of hit them hard. And there's many years left for that to make any money and wash its face. So I think that this could definitely be, I would not be surprised to see the standard one, the 16 gig one, 699, and the extreme one, 799, 899. I'm not saying that's going to, but that's my expectation. I don't expect it to be cheap. I expect it to make money on every unit, because there's two people now that need to make money, Microsoft and Asus. So yeah.
Yeah,
I could be wrong, but yeah.
I would say that them raising the price of the Series S to $380 is a pretty bad sign for how they would price this. But if they were to price it aggressively, that would be a sign that Xbox, while they are leaving traditional console, is still very, very serious. I guess we'll see, right? Because I mean, look, my conclusion would be, if this launches like the X for like $800, they're not that serious. They're just doing this to pay lip service and seeing how it does, because that's just a very unserious price compared to what will probably be like a $600 PlayStation handheld and the existing $450 Switch 2, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, it will be. Yeah, I agree. But I think it's a case of Microsoft don't always do things in the most productive manner. And I think that for them, they can make it slightly more lucrative and attractive to the audience by just saying, here's buy it and you get a year's worth of Game Pass.
Mm-hmm.
That costs them nothing, and in actual fact, most of the time that makes them money, because Game Pass users tend to be on more, and they like that engagement. They'll buy additional packs, DLC on games that they've got. So there's all those options that they can get for additional revenue, and fundamentally, I think that's the most likely option, that both of these will come with a year's worth of Game Pass or such like, than a heavy discount.
A final question on all of this Xbox stuff, though, that undoubtedly must be coming to people's minds is, what do you think this means for a next-gen home console from Microsoft? Because when I see them sideline a dedicated handheld that is running an Xbox OS, and I mean, look, putting an Xbox sticker on an Asus product instead, they've said they're going to make a next-gen Xbox, and they said it really is, and it really will just be an Xbox. But I've long wondered if what they'll just do is have some standardized $1,000 gaming PC they call an Xbox instead. After seeing this announcement today, that's the way I'm leaning, is that their next-gen Xbox is going to be a gaming PC. And it will have its own Xbox boot, like SteamOS, but or do you think, and maybe I mean, I know you have sources of your own, like, what do you think it's going to look like now?
No, I think you're right. And I said this before, many, many years ago. I think that's where they're going. It will be a desktop. It will be abstracted at a level. I'm pretty sure the next big machine they make will be ARM based. I don't think it will be x86.
Really?
So from my perspective, ARM is taking over the world. From my world, from the commercial world, ARM is getting more and more involved in everything, both from desktop, laptops, and certainly servers. So I think that the future there is the fact that you can do more. ARM always makes sense. RISC-based approach always makes sense for gaming, because it's better focused for that kind of hardware. You get more bang for your buck. You use less die space, all this. So fundamentally, that's what I think they'll do. And I think this is a stepping stone to that, by creating a nice, abstracted, more transient operating system that is proper lightweight, like an Xbox app, that's running on Windows, means that it will give the option for people to be able to jump to it. And it might even replace Windows in the future, but certainly in a gaming function, it'll be an Xbox device, and that'll be a powerful PC, £1,000, and that'll be the next gen Xbox. I think price doesn't matter anymore. People will spend the money. So yeah, I think that's what they'll go with. And I wouldn't even be surprised to see them partner with NVIDIA, make an NVIDIA Xbox app, because at this point, all bets are off. AMD is just one partner of many, and NVIDIA are heavily involved in ARM, to the point where they tried to get a license by buying a company. So there's all of that kind of caveat around the fact that if they can get a good deal from somebody, that would make even more sense. And if they remove all those barriers and make the software transient across any kind of piece of hardware, it means that they can then have their operating system being in competition again with SteamOS, which is being installed on various devices. So, yeah, I think the next Xbox will be just a PC in all but name.
Mm-hmm. And I guess as I want to start transitioning to like the PlayStation handheld stuff, but before I do, I just, what do you think the effect this would have on, I guess, just the gaming hardware market in general? Because I think especially PC gamers sometimes underestimate how connected everything is. Like, I think there's no way around this. Like, Sony will soon be releasing $80 games, I bet, and game makers will too, because a console maker, Nintendo, decided Mario Kart World should cost $80. We'll get into what I think about that soon, but like, these things are all connected. And like, even like smartphones, you can't tell me Sony making the PlayStation 5 Pro $700 didn't a little bit have to do with them seeing like $1,500 iPhones and going, well, heck, why can't we? Why do they charge $1,500? Microsoft is launching a $700 or whatever it is Series X. It's not even upgraded. Why can't we charge like that this much for that? And also, they'll look at graphics cards, I am sure, and go, well, so AMD's new graphics card is $600, really like $700 on the market right now. And if that's $700 for just the graphics card, our console's weaker, but not crazy weaker. It's like not in a different solar system of performance. Why can't we charge the same as a high-end graphics card? We're selling you a high-end graphics card console. These things are all connected. So like, how do you think this will affect competition from Sony, Nintendo, and of course NVIDIA and AMD and PC, if what Microsoft is doing from now on is selling like $700 handhelds and $1,000, I assume that's what you would expect, like gaming PCs that they call Xboxes? Do you think this will bring more pricing pressure against the competition, or just how do you think the market might change?
I don't think this will change the market. I think Xbox has changed because of the market, as you've just quite rightly said. I think everyone else has started to push the prices up because they can. I mean, NVIDIA own the PC market. There's no argument with that. And therefore, a cartel. So it's the Rockefeller model. When you control the market, you control the price. So Sony are in that position when it comes to desktop powerful consoles. They control the market, therefore they control the price. And as you said, the PS5 Pro was charged at a rate that made them revenue. It was a profit-earning device from day one, and that was its point. And that's why they had a separate drive, because in their head, they just don't want digital. They don't want physical anymore. They'll offer the option, but it's there. And you've seen that with the fact that the actual drives have all dropped in price. They're basically half price. I bought about 5 because they're now at $59.99. That tells you they're going to get rid of them because they're just not selling. So rather than leave dead stock sitting in residue where you've got to pull it back and then there's a cost to that in supply chain, they're just clearing out inventory at the front end. This is common stuff. And that's exactly what's happened with Xbox by putting their prices up on Series S. Yeah, some of it might be tariffs and la, but largely it's around the fact that we just want to make sure that everything that's out in market makes us money and we don't want to pull it back. Because fundamentally, at some point, they're going to have to either write it off or give discount to retail to not take it back for them to keep it. So I think this is Xbox reacting to what PlayStation, Nintendo, and NVIDIA are doing. And they've got to play the same game. But it's also around the fact that, again, you know this, in business, there's no such thing as competition. Everyone's competition until they're an ally. So cartels and companies get together, and that's how cartels exist. So, supermarkets are a good example in terms of everyone fixes the prices, everyone controls I mean, I know this firsthand. So they all have this week you do a discount on this item and next week we'll do it and you do this, and they flip-flop because they control prices and it pushes people to go around the stores and go to different places. Gaming is exactly the same. And a lot of the people that have money in all these companies have their fingers in all the pies. So I think what's happening now is the fact that gaming's become very cutthroat, very expensive, far more expensive than it ever was, and therefore people want revenue out of it. So Sony, you can see that yourself. Sony are doing more and more cheaper games in terms of remasters and getting them out the door, but they're trying to balance the cost. Yeah, they're trying to balance the cost. They're not making brand new games as much as they were, and they're certainly making more remasters. Nintendo have just launched a Switch. I think most of the games are actually just either ports from older versions or remasters of old games on Switch One. So, but they're still charging full price for those games, and the market's accepting it. At the end of the day, they're making money on those games, and that's a much, much cheaper revenue. You're not building a game from scratch. You're not writing code from scratch. All your source is already there. Basically, you're managing a small development team, maybe some artists and some physical media to get it out the door, and that's it. So I think that what this is Xbox trying to play that same game. So I wouldn't be surprised to see PlayStation's PS6 and its handheld version coming out, being also very expensive, because that's where the market's at now. And the next Steam, when that comes out, the Steam Deck, I'm pretty sure it won't be $399. I'm pretty sure it'll be $699, because people will pay that price. And actual fact, people look back at Nintendo Switch 2 and go, actually, it's not that expensive compared to everything else. So I still think there's a market there for medium range prices, but I think cheap consoles, those days are long gone. I don't think we're going to see them again at all.
I actually have a suspicion of how PlayStation might still try to offer some sort of consolation prize of some cheap version of the PS6, maybe. But we'll get to that in a second. I want to get into PlayStation, but I have to ask this because this just popped in my head as well. I'm not saying I'm sure this is happening, but when I saw, again, I think the Xbox Series X 2 terabytes like $730 or something, and the Series S is $380. And then meanwhile, Sony, at least whether it's temporary or not, dropped the price on PlayStation 5s. But I happen to know that Sony really did think these tariffs were coming, and they shipped a ton of PS5 Pros into the United States, and they're still making a lot of them. So they're probably doing this temporary price cut because they're like, maybe we overcompensated and we need to clear some stock. That's why they do a price drop. Microsoft is raising the price. That tells me a lot more aren't coming. And this, do you think Microsoft's even still producing series consoles, or do you think they're just trying to sell? You think they've stopped production, or effectively?
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking as well. Like, because you don't raise prices if you're planning to sell a lot. You raise prices if you're done and you're just going to milk what's left on store shelves.
Exactly. As I said earlier, exactly. It's about making sure that everyone that's out there now makes them a profit rather than losing them money. So that's what they've done it. I think they've stopped a while ago. I think Xbox Series consoles are finito.
Jeez. This piece of content is brought to you by Raycon's E26 Everyday Earbuds. Their everyday earbuds are designed for all-day comfort and incredible sound quality. Whether you're mowing the lawn, working from home, or enjoying your favorite podcasts on a walk with your dog. They have excellent features like active noise cancellation, a 32-hour battery, multi-point connectivity, and in general, what I would say is these things just work. They connect quickly, they're easy to control, and there's really no fuss, which isn't always true with earbuds. That really stood out to me. But also what stood out to me is how stylish they are as an accessory in general. They come in a spectrum of vibrant colors to match your summer vibes. I chose royal blue with a yellow sunset case, and I think it looks much cooler than most earbuds I've come across. So look, if you are interested in Raycon's E26 Everyday Earbuds, click the link in the description box below, or just go directly to buyraycon.com/Moore's Law. That's MOORESLAW. buyraycon.com/Moore's Law to get 15% off the best-selling everyday earbuds. You'll be supporting the channel and getting the best price possible on these fantastic earbuds if you do so. So support Moore's Law is Dead with Raycon's E26 everyday earbuds today. All right, well, let me move on then to the PlayStation side of this. So I recently, and by recently I think it was like 2 days ago, put out a leak during a live stream where I have to be careful. It came to my attention from documentation from people who have access to this. Well, I guess we can call them Sony partners at a minimum, that they had been briefed on a new efficiency mode. And in fact, I got the documents specking out what it is. And it's like in efficiency mode, the PS5 or PS5 Pro runs at 36 compute units. So if you have a PS5 Pro, it's not using most of them. And it clocks, I think, the GDDR6 down to half bandwidth. It's interesting, it limits clock speeds of the GPU to the minimum to be certified as a game on PS5, because it has boost clocks. It's usually at 2.2 gigahertz, but there's some games where I don't know if you know what the minimum clock speed is for PS5, if it's 1.9 or 1.8 gigahertz or something. Sorry.
I don't. All I know is that it can go just below 2 gigahertz. That's a standard load level I've seen.
And that was just me guessing. So I'm guessing the minimum is 1.9 something gigahertz. And so what this efficiency mode does is it does everything it can that doesn't break backwards compatibility. It just goes, yeah, look, some PlayStation 5 games can run at half this, half that, and we're going to do that. And if you run a game in efficiency mode, maybe you'll lose 20% performance, but maybe your energy is cut in half. And to some people, that'd be very attractive. Now, what's interesting about this, though, is it's not just a new marketing initiative. There is a flag that's the same as the Trinity, which is the code name for PlayStation 5 Pro, or base flag for developers right now. And immediately when I saw that, I went, oh, a separate flag for an efficiency mode that boots in a different way, just like it would boot a game in a different way for a pro. They are trying to hide that this is the flag for their upcoming handheld. Like, that's what this is. They know I've already leaked tons of stuff. The second they brief people on a handheld mode, that's going to leak. So I think they were hoping efficiency mode could run as it. But I wonder what you think about this, because I think it's actually a really smart idea to have developers programming for a handheld before they realize they're programming for a handheld years in advance. Then when they announce the handheld, they just go to all these developers, they just snap their fingers and go, 90% of your games already support this handheld, just so you know.
Yeah.
So just, but what do you think about the efficiency mode and, you know, Sony doing this for a future handheld? It sounds like you agree that's what this is.
It sounds like it. It's the perfectly viable way to do it because, as you say, the reality is they put these clauses in terms of a lower and higher bounds just for safety reasons. You could probably go below and it wouldn't break it. I mean, people get paranoid about backwards compatibility, but so long as the architecture instruction set's the same, it's not going to pick. Timings are not as important as people think they are because of how things are designed nowadays. But there's always edge cases, so that's why they have a lot of these things and situations. I think the fact that they've gone to efficiency mode makes sense, and the PS Portal always made sense to me. I said it even before it came out. I thought it'd be popular. I thought it'd be an easy route to market, and also it's a test bed, and it's worked. It sold really well. They've made a lot of money on it, and in certain parts of the world where you can't get good handhelds, it's sold incredibly well. So parts of China are using them. So I think that was just a route to say, actually, there's a market there for us. And again, it's another one to expand your market. There's that whole, can we get this out the door? So I think the efficiency mode makes perfect sense. I've not heard it from people that I speak to. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying that it's true or not, but it sounds perfectly viable and it would be the best way to do it, because the best way to get developers to make games for your new hardware is to make it the path of least resistance. And the easy way to do it is by going, here's the rules. You can stay within this margin. These are the standard practices. And then when people ship games, like you say, they're already shipping on those levels. The software and the driver can manage a lot of this for the developer themselves. And in fact, a lot of the time, the driver can actually hide some of the issues that developers make. Certainly the compilers and the toolkits that the SDK offers do that as well. So I would say that this makes perfect sense, and almost certainly we will see a handheld in the future because the market's pushing that way. Now, again, this doesn't mean it's going to be a massive success, and it means it's going to blow off the PS5. It's just expanding your market, because if you've got what is it, 5 million Steam Decks out there or something along those lines. Yeah. If you can eat into 50% of that, that's an extra 2.5 million people that weren't on your PS5 marketplace that are now in your ecosystem. So that's what it's for. And it will be sold at a profit so that every piece of hardware that's sold doesn't lose them money. So therefore, it's a net win. If they sell 10, it's still a bonus. So yeah, I think this makes perfect sense. And Sony's development solution for all developers has been very tight for many, many years, as in they try to do as much for developers as possible to make that the path of least resistance. And to be fair, the PS1, when that started, that's exactly what they did. That's how they won. It wasn't that they had the best hardware. It was about the fact they went out and wooed developers left, right, and center and gave them all these libraries. Whereas at the time, people like Nintendo and Sega were very, oh, no, you're not looking at my homework. These are our libraries. You can't see them. And then at that time, Sega reacted with the Saturn and did what Sony were doing, which is just basically giving all that out to all developers. Say, here you go, fill your boots. This is all the tricks and trades of the hardware. That's what Sony have always done. And again, that's what they do now. They make it easy for developers because at the end of the day, they need them.
Yeah, and I have to jump in on that too. Nintendo's acting like that again, just so everyone knows listening to this. I mean, I haven't done a leak about it. I'm not going to put some quote on screen, but now that this comes up, I have a lot of developer people that I half the time just speak with them to pick their brain. I mean, they're the people making the games. I see a new piece of hardware. I'm like, what's your take on this? But they message me without me asking them to, just because they want to tell someone, and they can't obviously just tweet this out or they'll get in trouble, that Nintendo sucks right now. Like, they charge too much for their cards. They won't give out dev kits. I had one developer telling me how, like, Nintendo won't give them dev kits, and it is basically forcing them to guess if their game is compatible before the Switch 2 launches. Like, and this is the exact mindset you said. Don't look over here. It doesn't matter. We're in charge. You have to deal with all of our nonsense. Anyways, it's the way Sony acted, frankly, with like the PS2 and early PS3. And I guess where am I going with this? I just want to throw that out there right now, that if there was ever a time to do this again to Nintendo, Microsoft and Sony, this is the best time, because whatever you think about Nintendo public facing, with that side of them, behind the scenes developers are really quite fed up with working with Nintendo right now. But I have to ask this. Let's like get into something I know people will want to discuss, like the performance of well, actually, we should probably start here. So, not kindly asking, join the Patreon, writes on and says, it seems everyone is content with base PS5 performance for the PS handheld, and I would agree that would be really nice if it was launching this year, but if it's coming out in 27 or possibly 28 and has to be around for what I assume is a standard console generation cycle, so I guess having to last till 2034 with the PS6, was that really going to be enough, or could we have another Series S situation? Well, actually, let me jump in and say the PS5 is going to have games supported for it for the next decade, I think, whether we like it or not. I think that's just going to happen. But I wonder what you think about, I still think this flag that says your game has to support 36 compute units and runs at these clock speeds could still just be a precursor flag for PS5 games running on a PS6 handheld. And fundamentally, I've long thought, look, a PS4 handheld you could do right now because of how old that performance is. A PS5 handheld you could do next year. But if you do it next year, I mean, the PS6 is probably coming out by 28, right? So wouldn't you want to just wait to have a PS6 handheld so that it's for 20 years the games are supported on it? Or I wonder what you think about that.
Well, I think the thing with handhelds is people, and this happened with the Switch, this happens all the time, that there has to be a level of concession in terms of the hardware. So, I mean, I'm thinking back to like the old days of like the Game Gear, or the Game Boy. That now the Game Gear was basically a Master System slightly better in your hand, and that was their 1985 hardware. So that was 5 years old, and that was the pinnacle of gaming, apart from the Atari Lynx, which was way ahead of its time at the same time. But the reality is you're not going to make money, and you can't really do it because power is the problem, screen size is the problem, memory bandwidth and memory power usage is the problem. So whatever the next console that coming from Sony is, if it was PS5 performance in handheld, that's already a great margin. That's already a great baseline, in my opinion, because the reality is that it's not going to aim for 4K, so that saves you a hell of a headache there anyway. It's not going to aim for 4K textures, that's saving you even more. And realistically, it's probably going to have an easier route to delivering it if they've got a lot of cloud solutions, which Sony are heavily developed in as well. So the reality of the PS5, 6 handheld, whatever they're going to call it, PS Portal 2, it could be a hybrid solution. So the reality is it could run local games, like they updated the Portal to run local games at a very low level. It's probably going to be the same thing, where it'll have a level of power that says you can run this, you can run the same game as a PS5 on this 1080p screen at 900p with slightly cut back, but maybe no ray tracing, or maybe lower levels of ray tracing.
Or just the frame rates drop more often.
Yeah. 30 rather than 60. So those cuts, they're enough. You can take 75% of the performance away, and all of a sudden you've got a handheld that's mirroring your PS5, albeit no longer 4K upscale using PSSR or FSR3 or whatever. And that would be the target. And then in addition to that, you can say, but if you've got the game on the PS5, you can stream it and get the same quality as you do on PS5, PS5 Pro on your handheld. And it's got a really embedded, really fast latency device there because they've put the hardware inside the handheld. I think that's what the next PS handheld will be. It will be a hybrid solution that does both local and remote gaming, and it'll be used. I think the problem with the Western market, we're all guilty of this. We only see the world from our little bubble of where we are, but there's a huge market out there. There's China, there's India, there's all these other places, even parts of Saudi Arabia. There's this huge market that's growing up, and they are already adopting online. They've got better infrastructure than we have in parts of the UK. And therefore, it makes all of these things far more viable. So a handheld that does both means I can sell it everywhere. You can take this part if you want and ignore this part, and vice versa. So I think that that's what the PS handheld will be. It'll be a hybrid solution that will be 1080p versions of PS5, for want of a better description. I'm not saying that's fact. I'm saying a cut down version of PS5, or the full experience streamed to your device that's nearly as good as.
Yeah, so I guess here's my Steelman argument, though, for like why this might be compatible with PS6 games and why they would want to do that. And I've talked to a lot of developers about, they bring this up to me all the time too. Like I'll ask about PS6, PS5, Xbox, yada, yada, yada. And this comes up all the time. By the way, most of our games are still sold on PS4. And Sony still has a massive section of their fan base that they have not successfully moved from PS4 to PS5, and we're already mostly through this console generation. I think it's conceivable that Sony is worried. I don't know what sales the PS5 is at now. I think it's still doing as well as the PS4 in line sales, at least. So it's not doing bad, anybody. But I think that there's a worry Sony probably has of like, until we drop the price, and they don't want to drop the price more, because I agree with them. It's insulting to drop it below a Series S. But I think I think eventually the PS5 will cost less than a Series S. But like, they need some option with the following console gen that's cheaper, I think, to get the PS4 people who maybe skip the PS5 to finally get some version of the PS6. And if you make again, I don't know what the specs will be, but let's say the PS6 is 120 compute units, RDNA 5, blah, 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 blah. And that's on 2 or 3 nanometer or whatever. I think you could very easily have another die that is still just 36 compute units, but much like the Series S, has the newest CPU, IO, all of that, and just enough RAM, hopefully more, relatively speaking, with Xbox with the Series S. And it will be 100% backwards compatible with this PS5 efficiency mode. Obviously, 100% backwards compatible with everything PS4. I mean, on 2 nanometer, PS4 games will probably run at like 5 watts. I don't know. And then they'll say, also developers, there's now a PS6 efficiency mode. The PS6 efficiency mode can be used on the big home console if you wanted to, if you want to save energy. But also, this allows you to run all of your games in this like 15-watt handheld. And we're going to make a Series S little, like, what do they call it? PlayStation TV thing. And that is their new $349 thing. Please, PlayStation 4 people, move to the new console. That's my Steelman argument for it, and why it wouldn't just be a PS5. I just think they have to make some version of a budget PS6 that also works as a handheld to get PS4 people to move over, and just to keep that compatibility. But I wonder what you think, because I see some people thinking it's just going to be a PS5, and I'm like, if you're making a new console, man, just make it a PS6 that's the size of a PS5 handheld anyways.
Well, I think that there's a lot of strength in your argument, but I think the reality is that Sony have a lot of roots here. And like I said, this is why the hybrid solution makes the best sense. One, this is all, mystical black magic. They're predicting the future, and that's the biggest problem. It's hard to predict the future. It's not as easy as it used to be. So back in the day when people were making computers and consoles, it was very easy to say, look, do you know what? Memory's going to get cheaper. So I'm going to hedge my bets. Like the Commodore 64, famously 64 kilobytes of memory, because Jack Tramiel knew that the prices were going to come down, and he made a profit on it because he saw the future. Sony did it with the PS4 with the whole 4 gig, 8 gig, all that kind of stuff. But here, they've got to make a bet. Now, that doesn't mean that if they make a PS5-based handheld, it can't run PS6 software, because the software stack's theirs. They own it. It's their kingdom. So the reality is that most games, even now on PS5, could come on PS4, because they could be cut back, they could be heavily cut back, but there's not many games that fundamentally would be impossible to run. I mean, even things like Rift Apart, you could run it on a PS4 because it runs on a Steam Deck. So the reality is it can run on a PS4, but it's all cost and revenue. So there's always going to be a cutoff point, and that's what I think they'll do. I think there'll be definite benefits in the handheld over the base PS5, absolutely, because that's just economies of scale and how things work when you move forward. Like you just said, new nanometer, smaller node, better memory. You can go to, you don't even need to use GDDR6. You can go to whatever LPDDR5.
Like LPDDR6 by then, probably.
Yeah. So there'll be inherent benefits, and most hardware after a period of time is downclocked in software anyway. Hardware wise, it's always faster. They just get cheap bins, chuck them on. It could go faster, but for quality of across the board, they just software lock it and run it at a certain level. So I think the PS handheld will be a hybrid. It'll be a PS5 stroke PS6 with some bits thereof and therein. And certainly, all the stuff from PS5 Pro will be in it. So think of it more of a PS5 Pro Plus. But the reality is that I think that the hybrid solution that they'll lean into is the ones where somebody goes out and makes a really impressive game, and they'll just go, you can still play it, but you just can't play it locally. You've got to have a cloud solution to play these games. But I think that's what they'll do. But the cross-generation that we've got, and just touching on your point about the PS4 market, it's GTA 6. Once GTA 6 lands, that last remnants of PS4 people will just all jump ship, because that game won't be on PS4.
You're probably right.
PS5, and so that's where I think that market will finally die. But like you say, I agree. I think the PS5's got another 10 years in it at least from now, if not more.
So you seem to think, and again, I guess you could argue maybe it's kind of a little pedantic or whatever, like this distinction of PS5 handheld, PS6 handheld. Doesn't really matter. The graphics will be the same because it's constrained by power and the node it's going to end up using anyways. But I guess the key difference would be from the start of the PS6 gen is literally every game for sure, no matter what, going to work with this handheld because there's a PS6 handheld flag, and that's why they wait to launch it for that. Or is they just don't think that's worth waiting for? That's really what the question comes down to. And I guess the one thing I will say is when I see the Switch 2 and I think a lack of enthusiasm behind it, I could see an argument for launch it now, launch the PS5 handheld now. Like this is the time to strike. But I don't know. I should probably move on because I know we only have so much time here. So this is actually the first time I've done this. I'm going to play a reader or a listener voicemail.
What are your thoughts on AMD and Sony's partnership for Project Amethyst? How beneficial is this for AMD considering the widespread adoption and installation of RADEON software that will probably be a given going forward if the top console uses it heavily, coupled with the rise in handhelds led by Steam and the Steam Deck that are currently solely AMD hardware for the foreseeable future, which will most likely take advantage of the partnership whether directly or indirectly with the knowledge AMD will learn.
Right. And so just to recap for everybody who's listening, his point is Sony and AMD's integration together working on Project Amethyst, which is basically Sony as PSSR, AMD as FSR4, but we're going to share info as much as we can and try to make each other better. What do you think that means for the future of Radeon graphics on PC, knowing that with developers, knowing that we have Sony and really Valve helps now too, Sony, Valve, and AMD all teaming together to make this upscaling tech? Like, how much of a leg up does this give AMD on catching up to NVIDIA with DLSS? And what do you think that means for FSR support, which was a little lackluster with FSR3, but already with FSR4, it's way better support in for how long it's been out. What do you think this means for the future of that in Radeon?
Again, I think this is around the fact that everyone's playing catch up. And when it comes to technology in the gaming space for NVIDIA are leading the market and they continue to lead the market. And I think it's a classic one where NVIDIA never stands still. So all Amethyst really is, and Sony are in the same fight now with AMD, is they are trying to catch up to where NVIDIA is because they control the market. Their software stack, their hardware is good. No, I've said this before, I think even on your podcast. Their software stack is one of their biggest benefits, although their driver issues recently have been a bit crazy in terms of what happened with the 50 series. But that's where their key strength is. They've got a lot of clever people that are doing a lot of great stuff, and they're maximizing the hardware in very specific ways. And they're also getting their fingers very heavily into a lot of game studios. And that's a good thing. That's a very, very good thing. But what Sony and AMD are trying to do is, certainly Sony with their funding of Unreal Engine 5, is that didn't quite go as planned with them. So they've kind of made sure that they've steered them a little better into terms of being more optimized, being a bit more efficient. And Unreal Engine 5 is a bit of a heavy beast since it came out on, even on PC, let alone console. I know a lot of people just talk about console, but it's heavy on PC as well. So I think that Amethyst is really around Sony's software expertise using the server infrastructure to create all of this software rendering in terms of the machine learning stuff on AMD servers. So AMD benefit because they get all of the daily throughputs that NVIDIA get that they don't see, because NVIDIA do it all the time. Developers fire their stuff at them and did all their machine learning with DLSS from the start. They got all this information from every rendered frame and worked out their solution and their library to make it as good as it actually is. So what this is Sony saying, hey, we won't do any funding of these server stuff. AMD, you fund all that because that's your expertise. So they're getting all these free servers. That's what I think it is. I'm not saying this is true. This is what I think it is. This is how I would do it if I was running it. I'd say, you've got the infrastructure, we've got the software. Let's get together. I'll fire it all at you. You process it. You can access the data, but you give it back to me and I can use it for my own solutions. So this is the classic strategic partnership, as in both of them are getting benefits from the same information. And then the main thing here is they use this to go to all of the developers and say, hey, look, we will fund you. We will subsidize your development to put this in the game and push it out. And that's where I think it will work. Now, this doesn't mean that PSSR is FSR4 and vice versa. It means they're both sharing the same information, but they might still be going off in different paths. But that doesn't matter because at the end of the day, any TAA solution, any TAU solution is all going to use the same inputs, and therefore it's all how good your outputs are. And another part of it is how efficient your software stack is, i.e., there's a cost to running these solutions in resident memory. The more efficient you make that and the better your library stack is, the smaller your model to fit on a local box and the faster it can be traversed in real time, the better the output. That's what this is for. And they've got a lot to catch up. And this is the thing that I know Amethyst is great, but AMD are still way behind DLSS 4. And that only just got announced. And you guarantee that they're working heavily on DLSS 5. So this is the thing where they need Sony's support, and Sony need their support, because realistically, PSSR, as good as it isn't competing with decent quality DLSS 4. Not yet, but it might get there. So I think this is a good stepping stone, but they need to get it more embedded in more studios, whereas DLSS is now kind of a given. Most big games on PC, if it doesn't have DLSS, you're scratching your head. So I think that's the reason why this exists. I hope it works. I really do. And with Sony's grunt, it should.
Here's an interesting thought, too, is me and my brother on the last episode were talking about Redstone, and a thing that I pointed out was the vibe feels so much different, though, with FSR 4 and Redstone than FSR 3. And the distinction I made is FSR 3 was like, oh, we totally didn't forget to do our homework. We like, oh, FSR 3 is coming, don't worry. And then like a year later it comes out, and there were never any specific promises. They were like, FSR 3 better than 2, goodbye. And they didn't tell us how it would be better. They didn't pretend that they would even try to be as good as DLSS. They were just like, open is good. And with FSR 4 and now Redstone, just months after RDNA 4 is launched, they're like, we're going to make it better, and here's how. And they talked about all of these specific, I'm forgetting off of the top of my head. I could probably pull up a couple of these, but let me see here. What did they say? Neural radiance caching. There.
Yeah.
Very, very, very specific thing they're going to do that isn't just we're copying NVIDIA. We're going to do this new thing, and it's going to make us as good as NVIDIA. And I also suspect if they have high-end cards coming anytime soon, they want this ready for those high-end cards. But is there a chance AMD actually gets closer to DLSS 4 than we think they might, simply because NVIDIA is asleep at the wheel? Because the way AMD's acting is different. They have like 60 games supporting FSR 4. I don't even know if FSR 3 got 60 games supporting it before FSR 4 launched. And so there's clearly an aggressiveness here and a lack of aggressiveness from NVIDIA, and I just wonder if maybe they catch up to DLSS 4 because NVIDIA doesn't really care about gaming anymore.
Again, everything AMD's doing, as I said before, it is catching up. So Neural Radiance cache was in the 50 series. So and they've done, it's not ray reconstruction, they're calling it ray reprojection or something, aren't they? But it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. So the Redstone stuff is much better, and FSR 4 is much better. I mean, but I was at the CSS and the CES January in Vegas, and they had it there, but they didn't even announce it. And I only saw it by chance. And I know that DF and other people saw it behind closed doors. Even that was a bit like hidden. You can't see FSR 4. The new cards aren't launching. So AMD still, in my opinion, are still AMD's worst enemy, because they seem to do, they snatch defeat for the jaws of victory all the time. And I think FSR 4 is great. I think in terms of a 1440p upwards, it's pointless at this point to say which is better. DLSS is better, but not significantly so. So they're close enough now to be in the same ballpark, I think, with FSR 4, by and large. But where they lack is all the other features. So neural radiance cache, ray tracing reconstruction, and ray tracing as a whole, even though it's got better, it's still, 40 series levels rather than 50 series. So I still think they've got a way to go, but they're definitely putting more effort and cost and money into their software stack, which they should have done years ago. That is definitely good. On the point of NVIDIA losing their interest in the gaming market, I think it's the case that they control it. What do they own? 90% of the market. So I think that they can, because it's a revenue stream that's just in addition to their AI and CARM industry, which is billions and billions and billions. So they're never going to give up on gaming because they own too much of it. But I think right now they're probably not investing as much R&D into it as they probably did a few years ago. And so, therefore, AMD and Sony might make them rethink that, and we'll see what comes next year. But the problem is that, a little bit like Microsoft, they are a sleeping giant. It doesn't take them long to wake up. So if they did wake up, they could probably shift it further on.
Well, I think NVIDIA wakes up faster than Microsoft ever does.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
My personal opinion. But
no, you're right, they do. But they are a big behemoth. If they want to move things, they can. But I think right now, I don't think they're investing as heavily in it as they used to, and they're doing a lot of open source. So they're ray tracing the RTX Remix stuff that's out there with Half-Life 2 and other people doing their mods. That's really good stuff, and that gives you a sign that they're keeping their marketplace and their buzzwords going by giving it to the market and letting them keep that engagement going, and therefore it cuts costs internally. And then when you need to, you just turn that back on and move forward. So I think right now AMD have got the chance to catch up, but they just really need to lean into it and hit the deadlines. That's the problem with AMD. They keep saying we're going to do this and then it slips. They need to hit deadlines. Whereas NVIDIA, like them or hate them, they do always ship things close to their target, even if sometimes they're not quite ready for launch. AMD, I mean, the 90 series for AMD was a madness. Here it is. No, it's not. That was just crazy.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. I guess the proof will be in the pudding on this one for Redstone. Like, if because I'm surprised how quickly they've announced more games support FSR4, how quickly they're going to have upgrades. If Redstone is out next quarter and it's closer, I'll go, oh, this is different. AMD isn't screwing around anymore. But you're right. We don't know yet. They have just announced it. It's still just a PowerPoint. If it's late next year that we get FSR Redstone, I'm going to go, yeah, look, NVIDIA is a moving target. I don't know. We'll see if they catch up, but I don't know.
No, so I think this relationship's going to work because Sony's involved, and therefore lots and lots of game developers are all going to use Sony's solution. And I guarantee you that the back end is going to be very similar from a developer's point of view. The front end might not be, but from the driver side of it, whether you plug into PSSR or plug into FSR4 or FSR Redstone, they're going to be very, very similar. Therefore, path of least resistance. So I think that's where AMD are going to gain a huge footfall in terms of getting their feet into the ground on marketing, because when developers are making games, they're now going to go, I'm going to support PSSR on consoles, and I'll just flick it over and that'll be FSR4 on the PC version. Jobs are good. And you're going to see more and more of that, I think, over the next coming 6 months, 12 months. More games shipping with FSR4 from day one. And that'll help them, because then FSR4 is competing with DLSS in every game rather than every other game.
So let me see here. Just in general, I want to ask your opinion here. The 9060 XT just launched. I said this in the tail end of the last live stream, but I just want to say it again, because I reported in that live stream in the beginning that the 9060 XT seemed like it had more supply than the 70 XT, selling well, blowing away previous AMD launches, and actually more of them were at MSRP than expected, according to the people I talked to. Near the end of the live stream, I was then told, oh, it's actually blowing away the supply the 9070 XT had, and it's actually selling incredibly high volume for an AMD launch. And I mean, another A+ launch from AMD with the 9060 XT. But what do you think about RDNA 4 and Radeon in general right now? We always tend to do what do you think about the competition? Because from where I'm sitting, I was pretty much ready last year to not write off Radeon, but like, look, they're always going to be at 20% or whatever it is. And that's it. I mean, they seem to not care anymore. And now when I see them executing well, innovating more quickly, and having much more repetitive announcements of how they're going to innovate every other month, well, NVIDIA seemingly has worse drivers than AMD now because their eyes just off the ball. Like, how do you see this panning out? And do you see a world where actually AMD does start to take some decent market share from NVIDIA? I think everyone needs to understand that when I say take market share, that doesn't mean they get to 50%. That would take like 20 years. But do you think something may be shifting here in the competition between GeForce and Radeon?
I think this is the best AMD have been for a while in the GPU space. I think they're doing a lot of things right, and then they go and shoot themselves in the foot again with that tweet they put out last week saying 8 gigabytes is enough, which is just, the 8 gigabyte argument is a bit blown out of proportion. I've been saying VRAM limitations for about 20 years, give or take. So this is nothing new, but all of a sudden all these tech people are talking about like they're the new messiah.
They just discovered it.
Be a problem. And it's just 8 gigabytes is fine if you're targeting no ray tracing in 1080p. You can limit it down, but once you start turning things on, they're going to go wrong. But I think where Radeon still, I think, isn't making enough ground is they should really disrupt the market by bringing 9070 performance for 9060 prices. That's what they should be doing. I think the 9070 is a good card. I bought one. I managed to get one close to launch, and I think it performs really, really well. I think it's a very, very good card. But it's not it's not cheap enough and it's not offering enough over the NVIDIA competition, and NVIDIA know that. And I think that's where you only disrupt the market by either offering performance you cannot get elsewhere, which back in the day the Radeon or ATI used to do with some of their functionality in the old gaming space, and obviously the 3DFX did that famously with the Voodoo. But those days are gone. So you either you move the market forward, which NVIDIA did, or you come in and undercut the market and deliver same performance. The problem with AMD is they're almost there, but their price is only just a little bit cheaper. And I think that mind share is the problem. Most PC gamers are going to go, forget NVIDIA though. I know I'm safe. And even though that's right or wrong, I think that's the problem that AMD have got to overcome. They're definitely working in the right direction, but I think their marketing is their problem. Their tech people aren't the problem. It's their marketing. They're not looking at the market objectively enough and understanding what they need to do. And that might mean that investment from their server space gets pushed into their game space, which, and NVIDIA don't need to do it. The gaming space is a cash cow for them, so they can make money on it. AMD aren't in that position. They're making a fortune from their server space, but if they want to make gaming work, they've got to subsidize it, and maybe they are, but they need to subsidize it more, in my opinion. I'm not saying I'm right.
Right, so I guess, am I wrong to characterize what you said this way? They're doing great this gen, better than you've seen in recent memory, but they brought, 4080 performance to half the price, or kind of, well, it depends. Well, 4080 launched at $1,200, so they actually did bring 4080 performance to half the price. It seems like the 9060 XT brings, how would we put this, 4070 performance, I guess, kind of to half the price, or almost half the price. And great, but next gen, they better bring 4090, 5090 performance to half the price, and they need to keep this going gen over gen consistently for this to really make a difference long term.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing well. They're not doing enough. The fundamentals are, if they brought out a 5090 level card for 800 quid, that's a game changer. I'm not saying they can, but that's a game changer. If they did that, that would disrupt the market. That would heavily disrupt the market. And that's what they need. What they don't need is 3 years after the 5090, we've got a 5090 and it's 200 quid less than 5090 3 years ago. Who cares? It's too old. I think that's their problem. They're still looking at things from an ideological point of view and not a current market. They're in a bubble rather than in the market in the real space. At the end of the day, NVIDIA marketed the 5060 as fast as a 4090. They need that, but real.
Are you too depressed to go outside because of how expensive Microsoft software is? Well, there's absolutely no need for that. Just go to CDkeyoffer.com. That's right. This piece of content is once again sponsored by CDkeyoffer.com. And I say once again because they've been a fantastic sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead and its community for many years. And that's because they always deliver the best pricing reliably for Microsoft products like Windows operating systems, Office software, and they also sell games and other things as well. So make sure you check them out, especially during their Easter sale going on right now. And if you do, use offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% on all Microsoft software, and then Die Shrink to save 3% off on everything else on the website. The community uses them. I use them for my new Zen 4 X3D desktop. And Jesse here needs to stop moping around, and I think use them as well. So that's once again, support Moore's Law is Dead by going to CDkeyoffer.com through the links below today. It's okay, Jesse. It's okay. Well, I wonder what you think of. I want to get to the Switch before we go, but really quick, I just also put out a leak where, and this is something I'd heard about for months, didn't say anything because, number one, the person didn't want me to say anything right away to protect them. But number two, until I got any more evidence, I thought it was too inflammatory to leak, because if I was wrong, I mean, this is just one of those things people would get all emotional about. I'm sorry. And for understandable reasons, people want another high-end AMD card. What I heard is, much like if you remember the Radeon 7, there might be a die shrink of Navi 48 coming with GDDR7 support that was probably just designed for the AI market. Again, think the Radeon 7, probably N3X, N4X. I heard ridiculously high clock speeds, 40% more bandwidth, but fundamentally nothing that new. They're just taking the same thing. It's 40% faster because it uses a better node and better RAM. And that's very easy to do compared to designing an entirely new architecture. And they could have a 32 gigabyte offering for like $1,000 that matches the 4090. No, the 5090, no, I don't think so. Although I will say in 1080p, maybe, just because it, like, in clock speed matters more there, and NVIDIA has a driver overhead issue with, like, so if you're going to 500 frames per second, AMD might actually beat the 5090 in 1080p because they can actually hit the higher max frame rates. But I wonder what you think about this strategy of AMD possibly bringing out like a 4090 32 gigabyte for maybe $1,000. I don't know price and if they'll go with that much RAM, although it sounds like they probably will. And like what difference that would make.
I think at the top end, and certainly creative development space, it would make an impact. And I think there's a big market there. It would be good for them to do it. And I think they need top end. That's why NVIDIA always keep the crown means something. It's always meant something throughout the generation of GPUs. Whoever holds the crown, and AMD used to. So they've been there, done that, and it helps their marketplace. So launching a top end card is like launching, your top-end sports car. It's there to say, look, we've got the fastest car on the road, because everything else you sell behind it. You don't sell that premium product, but that's the brand new market. So everyone thinks they're buying into that. And that's what AMD lack. They lack that black stallion running across the field that NVIDIA always have, that go, that's the horse that I'm backing because that horse is going to win the race. Even though they're not buying that horse, they're buying the bloody Mini Metro or whatever the car may be. But the reality is that AMD need a top-end card. So I'd love it. I'd love it if that was true. If they were going to do that, that would be great, because that would be competing at least in the 5080, 5090 space. That would be good.
And I think it would be a good reminder, right? Like, I think people miss that, like, AMD could compete with the 5090 right now if they wanted to, if they had planned to do so 3 years ago, that is. But like, they have the engineers to make whatever they want. They could match NVIDIA performance. They've chosen not to. And I think a lot of the backlash against Blackwell, this sort of thing of just pushing out a higher clocked die shrunk version as quickly as possible, could act as a reminder to people too, that like, hey, if we want to, we can make something faster that quickly. And I think there'd be a lot of people receptive to buying that, especially people that don't think 16 gigabytes is enough for a $1,000 card. I'm one of those people. And I think it could maybe steal a lot of people that look at the 5080 and go, I'm not spending $1,400 for a 16 gigabyte card that's 10% faster than a 4080 Super,
Yeah, I agree. And I think I mean, at the end of the day, a node shrink is underestimated of how much performance that gives you, because everything's closer together, you use less power, everything's smaller, so you can get more on the same space. So there's all this benefit that comes from that if they can just get a node shrink. But then the other part of that is all these manufacturers, of which there's only really two big ones, that they're really squeezing the market now because the cost is there on the wafers and it's going through the roof. So that's the problem we've got. And I know this in my space in terms of hardware, software, servers, everything's costing more money and the supply chain is getting longer, because if you want AI GPUs or you want a massive data farm for you because you're doing a huge SAP installation somewhere, the lead times are really long. You got to plan ahead, and it's not always easy to just get stuff at the drop of a hat, and it's certainly not cheap anymore. And I think that's the thing that AMD's still stuck with, because they haven't got their own marketing. TSMC, they used it, isn't it? Is that who they use? Yeah. So they're in a situation where they're governed by the prices they get on those chips. So, and the people who manufacture them know their value now, and NVIDIA have got a huge buying power with that, and I've heard squeezing people out. They're reserving stuff to make sure that the other people can't get it, or they're getting first dibs on it, same as Apple do. So I think that AMD's problem is they need to do something quickly to make that impact. I would love them to launch a top-end card at a decent price. But I think that the cost of the hardware now is so high.
Well, we know publicly. I leaked this a month or two ago, and then AMD came out and said it. They're going to be first to 2 nanometer, I think, before Apple. And they're going to be, from what I've heard, or actually shared documents showing it too, first to 1.4 nanometer with Zen 7. So from where I'm sitting, if AMD's first to 1.4 and 2 nanometer, it'd almost be weird if they weren't first to 3 nanometer this year or something. Like, AMD, with their server contracts with TSMC, this is the one thing they probably have against NVIDIA, is they can afford to get to the new node first. And I know it costs more, but NVIDIA's inflated this market so much. I mean, for AMD, launching a $1,000 32 gigabyte card that only has 50% margins is much better margins than they usually make in graphics compared to NVIDIA. And NVIDIA wouldn't do it, but AMD, again, it's like if AMD spends all this money to get to 30-40% GPU market share, NVIDIA would say that's peanuts. It's not peanuts for AMD. 40% of the GPU market share is more money for AMD, relatively speaking. But all right, we have to talk about the Nintendo Switch 2. I know you have one. I know you've tested it. My opening point is I like the hardware fundamentally, and I leaked the specs of it. But I leaked those specs like over a year ago, and I was told by people at NVIDIA, and I think I've heard you say this in a recent video, that 8nm SoC was done like 3 years ago. I mean, like they could have launched this late 23 easily, I think. And were they to have done that for $399, I think they would have taken the momentum like an Olympic torch and ran right with it, but they didn't do that. I think they've waited too long, and Xbox has announced a handheld. Again, it's really an Asus handheld, and Sony, I have rumors of Sony handhelds. And so my initial impression though of the Switch is it's like, God, if this was 2 years ago, kind of next to when the Steam Deck launches, this would be huge. I'm worried that this has just lost so much of their momentum though. But what do you think about the Switch 2?
So the first thing is, I think that they absolutely made a strategic decision that, do you know what, Switches are still selling, bean counters, which we can't underestimate that they do make a lot of decisions in a lot of companies all the time when there's no point selling Switch 2 because we're making huge profits on Switch 1.
100% agree with you. Keep going, though.
So that's the first thing. And then they seem to have sat on their hands too long, because I mean there's not a huge amount of issues, but I wouldn't say this is really ready to launch considering it was taped out in 2023. So there's still not a lot of games even from Nintendo themselves. I mean, not having things like Donkey Kong ready for launch, you're a month later, that's a showstopper for me. That's obvious that you wouldn't have a couple of big games launching with Mario Kart. And Mario Kart's just a Switch 1 game that's been ported halfway through development to Switch 2. It could be on Switch 1. It's not that drastically different from the previous games. So I think that here Nintendo have dropped the ball a little bit. They've been making money hand over fist. They're controlling the market. Everything's selling really well. And they've decided to go, do you know what? We need to get our Switch 2 out. And I think they got the hands caught. They got the pants caught taken down when somebody, I think it was Genki, or I was at the CES when they released the actual device itself, and then they had to do that announcement video and then say later on we'll show the device. So I think that even now, I still think this was rushed out because of other factors that Nintendo weren't controlling. I think they were waiting as long as they possibly could because they're very cash rich. They're a very, very rich company making more money than ever before. And they're quite draconian. They've always have been in terms of their control. So the Switch 2 for me is a good device. It could be better, but it has potential to be great under the hands of Nintendo. But as an early one, it's a little bit like the PS5 Pro, if I'm being brutally honest, is if I was advising people right now, I'd say good, but if you're not desperate, wait. There's nothing here now to jump into first thing. It might be good later on, but again, expectations are getting all blown out of proportion. This is not going to compete with PS5. It's not going to compete. I mean, it's not even really going to compete generally most of the time with Xbox Series S, although it will get close in some games. Basically, Xbox Series S games, but 30 FPS. That's probably what you're going to see out of this machine. So the reality is that I don't think it's going to set the world alight, but I didn't think the Switch was going to be amazing, and I was totally wrong on that. So the reality is that this is as good as Nintendo make it based on the games and the third parties they get on board. And I think that's where they need to make sure they don't screw themselves over again and not support third parties, make sure they bring games and make it very, very easy. I think the RAM's good. I think 12 gigabytes is about right.
I said it's enough. It's enough.
Yeah, and I do think that will get bigger. I think the 9 gigabytes allocated now will easily bleed to maybe 10, maybe 10 and a half. This is standard stuff. You can always give back. You can never take away. So when they release the console, they've got to be a little bit, reserved on what they need, and then go, do you know what, we've optimized the software. We can now run this with 512 meg less. We can do that a little bit less. We don't need all those CPU cycles anymore. Let's give some of that core back to the operating system. So I think those things will happen. And I think that'll make a nice improvement to the games as well. But if they can hit 10 gigabyte available to the games and they can get a little bit more out of the clocks, the battery's not great on it, I must admit. It's not as good as I thought it would be. But they definitely need to make sure that they do the work for third party, because third party will make or break Switch, because that's what made and break Switch 1. And I think that's my biggest question mark at the moment is how they treat third party. because you said some rumblings and I've heard some rumblings that they're literally picking and choosing. They're going, you're great, we'll work with you. You're too small, we're not going to touch you. And I think that's a recipe for disaster, because a lot of independent games and studios helped Switch become a success. And I think if they turn their back on them, that could be, counterproductive to it. So early days, but yeah, that's my view. Good, but definitely wait and see.
Something you said there really stuck out to me. It's a point I made on my recent live stream, and it's something that I think needs to be beaten into people's heads, because I think this is a seemingly subtle point, but I think has big ramifications. And you compared it, the Nintendo Switch 2, to the PS5 Pro. That is a very, 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 very bad sign for Nintendo, because the Switch 2 is like 6 to 10 times more powerful than the Switch 1. The PS5 Pro is 50% to 100% if it's crazy well optimized and uses PSSR compared to the PS5. But the fact that I saw this in review after review, people are like, this is basically a pro console. No, it's not. And pro consoles sell 10 to 20 million units. They don't sell 100. So I haven't seen any glowing reviews. And there's a part of me that's just screaming 3DS. This is a 3DS situation all over again, where the 3DS was quite a bit more powerful than the DS. And yet everyone thought it was just a new DS, which again, if this were to have launched in 2023, by the way, maybe with Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, that could have been a Switch 2 launch game. What are we doing? Like, it doesn't matter if they call it a pro console, because it's launching soon enough with big enough games that people would have just fed right into that, like Game Boy to Game Boy Advance. But I'm worried they're going to have to like redo a lot here. Like, we're going to have to die shrink it to Samsung 4 nanometer, make it $399, and have a bunch of games come out and do a soft reboot like we did with the 3DS. Because right now everyone's comparing that to a Pro, and a Pro would sell as many units as a Vita, and that's not going to cut it for Nintendo.
No, and I think that this was the Pro. That I think that was the original plan. I think their whole plan was to make a Switch Pro, and the Switch Pro was going to be the OLED model. I believe that was their original plan. They backed out of it because somebody somewhere said, "Do you know what? We're making loads of money. We can make even more money. Just do the OLED version." And that will happen with this. Because, I mean, the fact that it's not an OLED is a bit of a head scratcher in terms of, other than obvious things, which is cost, and you can extend the market by releasing an OLED where people double dip and buy an OLED if they've got the LCD one. I think that this is a device where they were a little bit feet in both sides. And this could be, again, classic Nintendo. Every second console doesn't seem to do as well. So we will wait and see. 3DS analogy is perfect in terms of...
Yeah, I'm not going to compare it to the Wii U, and I'm not really comparing it to the Vita, everybody. I'm just saying, if people see this as a pro console, it's not a pro console. They don't want this to sell like a pro console.
No, they don't. And again, it all comes down to them. There's enough power under the hood for it to make a difference. But it all comes down to, again, Nintendo need to make that stride forward. And, let's be honest, Mario Kart as a launch game doesn't smack me as much as Super Mario 64 did on the N64 and Breath of the Wild on the Switch. So that's an instant red flag to me to say that they didn't put their legwork in here and deliver a game that would astound people. But we'll wait and see.
Yeah, and I have a worry too, and so this is something developers have brought up to me, of like, this thing is like way better than a Series S. In fact, I saw your Cyberpunk video where you compared the Series S to the Switch 2, and the Switch 2 seems to run Cyberpunk better. I mean, just like, that's probably the system you'd rather play it on. And they managed to make that work, but I hear from so many developers that they're worried the software is going to hold back being able to maximize the Switch 2, because like, there's still, I think, a limit to how many times you can read and write on a game cartridge or something. Like, they have like these weird limitations. And I saw too that like some developer told me that they ran their Switch 1 game on the Switch 2, obviously just ran at a higher, maximized the dynamic res, hit 60 FPS. Well, this thing's way stronger, of course it did. But they only had access to like 3 gigs of RAM still for their old game. They couldn't even unlock it to use more, even though it's just sitting there. So I have a real concern that it's just like Nintendo's asleep at the wheel. Like, NVIDIA made this chip for them. NVIDIA thought the chip would launch late 23, and then it didn't. And it's like, I almost like have this... I imagine like Jensen Huang handing the APU to the CEO of Nintendo, and he goes, oh shit, we need to finish this. And like, then they just scrambled to try to make this thing, because that's how this is feeling right now with the state of the software and the lack of games for the launch.
Yeah, I like I said, I totally agree. I've said that already, and I think that this is, in reality, this happens a lot. So even in my space, most teams don't deliver to the milestones as agreed. So the quality of work from most people that I work with in big corporations and stuff is never at the level it was 10 years ago. It just isn't. So I think what we've got now is a lot of people make a lot of promises. They do a lot of planning, and everyone's got these safe models running everywhere and roadmaps and everything, but people don't do the legwork to make sure all your moving parts, all your enablers, all your integrated parts come together. This is a classic example, just like the PS5 Pro, where you had so many updates early on. You got all the PSSR stuff going on. This is exactly the same thing. The backwards compatibility function on the Switch is good for certain games. So you can get huge boosts just by running the game on that. But as you said, they're definitely going to limit RAM. They're probably going to limit GPU clocks and even cores sometimes. And this is because the software stack and the operating system isn't ready yet. The APIs are not finished. So they're going to update these. And then all of a sudden, you're going to get games that boost suddenly. You know, things like Red Dead on the Switch, which runs at 30 FPS. Probably, in my opinion, still could have had a 60 FPS mode. That'll probably get patched and have a 60 FPS mode. But it will take them to update the operating system before that patch comes out. And all these things go on in the background that everyone can't talk about because Nintendo are very much, as you said, asleep at the wheel. They're behind the curve. They should have done all these things sooner, and they haven't. The console's launched. There's not a huge stack of games coming out. The operating system doesn't seem fully done. It is quicker, but in my opinion, it should be significantly quicker than it is, depending on what it's doing. So I still think there's a huge margin for updates here. But yeah, we'll see. I think in 6 months' time, the Switch 2 will look and feel a lot different than it does right now. But they had to hit March. They had to hit June deadline to get this out the door in a certain quarter because of the stock market. So it's all around those things that drive these things. I think if they'd waited to Christmas, it probably would have been a better launch. But market is market. They need to get it out when they do. So here we are. It's a strange one, though. I must admit, it's a strange one. All the time they've had to do it, it still doesn't feel ready. That's a head scratcher for me, especially for the Nintendo.
Yeah, honestly, it reminds me of NVIDIA Blackwell. I mean, I heard that thing was ready to launch summer of last year. And I was like, well, I mean, I'm sure drivers will be perfect because it's launching so late. And it's like they forgot to finish the drivers. Maybe they were just too distracted by AI. All right, I know you got to go soon. I think I have one or two more fun questions moving on from the Switch. Hayabu writes in and says, games drive better minimum hardware requirements and vice versa. This symbiotic relationship, to me, seems poised to cause the PS4 and Xbox One to be dropped for good when everybody migrates for GTA 6. You already said that, so it's interesting. Relatedly, you recently said, talking to me, in a die shrink, that the bottleneck is functionally anything below PS5 hardware, but I think we can narrow it down for PC as the minimum hardware specs for GTA 6, as I think it will set the minimum standard for the next 10 years. Do you agree? And to give you some background, I did a die shrink where I brought in feedback for developers for interesting questions about what's holding back graphics. And it was funny. They basically all said, honestly, if you could just make the minimum hardware requirements PS5 performance and PS5 level hardware features, and we could throw out all the old crap we have to have backwards compatibility for, graphics would get so much better overnight. But I'm wondering what you think, like, about GTA 6 and the repercussions of what this will have for graphics and stuff, because I didn't actually think about that much until you mentioned it in this podcast like 30 minutes ago. But like, yeah, I mean, GTA 6 could be the harbinger of the death of a lot of old stuff.
It will be, and that's why you won't see it on PC. That and the complexities of launching across, a variation of hybrid machines. But I think that the PS4's got to die at some point, and it should have died already. And the point about you've got to draw a line in the sand, absolutely, and that's what consoles of old used to do, and that's what we're not doing now. We're still having these. Everyone's developing the games in exactly the same way they made PS4 games, made Xbox One games. So. And the reality is, it's the fragmentation of the market as we see it now. You've got all these hybrid machines. You've just got a Switch 2 that's already, as powerful as a PS5 Pro and the bottom end of the current generation, the Series S. So that's going to hold back the market, in quotes, because that's a target for developers. Or it's, as we've seen with games that would never have come to it, but somebody said, there's enough money in here, we'll go and do it. So your Witcher 3s, your Doom Eternals, where somebody's got, there's money in this, go away and really make it. And that used to happen. I mean, back in the day, 8-bit machines, you get the same game on two different machines, and it'd be completely different games made by completely different teams in completely different aspects, but they have the same title. Even Mega Drive had Virtua Fighter 2, but it was a side like a Street Fighter game. It wasn't 3D. So those things happen a lot, but they don't happen as much now. But I think that the PS5 as a baseline will only happen, and it should happen, when Sony decide it will. Because the reality is that Sony have such a big sway in the market in terms of games being made. They've got a vested interest to still make games that will run on the PS4, or still make games that will run easily on their servers over a streaming service. So the only way things move forward is if a GTA 6, as big as it is, they've always been, Rockstar stand out from the industry. They are absolutely astronomically great. I praise them every time I can. That company is, people will say, oh, they've got all this money. They've earned their dues. They've earned their respect. They have consistently made games. DMA Design from Scotland, they're based on. That's the company where it came from. They are really talented, really experienced, and they put passion in and they take the time. But they've earned that because they've got all this revenue stream coming from GTA games. Even now, it's still in the top 10 all the time. So their revenue stream, they aren't chasing the market. They can do what they want. But there's not many other companies that can do that. So that I still think that GTA is this red flag. I don't think 99% of the rest of the industry will get close to what they're doing. I think the Witcher 3-4 demo we just saw, that's probably the pinnacle of what you'll see this generation as multi-platform. That's really, really good. It's a demo. It's not the final game. It's not the actual game, in fact, and I doubt it'll even be 60 FPS on PS5 when it launches. But the reality is that that's what can be done now when you make a demo for that hardware, focusing on PS5 as a baseline. That's what that shows. So I think The Witcher 4 is a better example of where the baseline is. But a lot of the baseline is memory and feature set, as you've said. So ray tracing needs to be good enough. NVIDIA are way ahead, so they're fine. But AMD are probably not. So there's a bigger market of AMD that will drop out. And really, the PS5 is probably not powerful enough to really push ray tracing very hard. So that's...
But it has the feature set, right? The point I made in that die shrink was just minimum, not ideal performance. You know, like if we knew we didn't have to worry about we didn't have to worry, frankly, about those 1060s that people still have, or about the 5700 XTs. At least, I'm not saying this is what you would want a game on, but if this was the minimum, like how much more efficient would programming become, you know?
Absolutely. And again, it's because that baseline means that you can ignore all your old stuff, throw out your old code and just target that spec. And I think that comes down to memory, feature set, as you say, ray tracing, functionality, and just a baseline to say it's going to have at least 8 cores, 16 threads. It's going to have at least 16 gigabytes available, with 12 available to me. It's going to have ray tracing functionality. I can do all this work within that box, and I can pick and choose. And until that day comes, it will never move forward. And we've got games that are doing that now. So I think Indiana Jones was ray tracing hardware only. So was Doom. So both those games only require that. But that's not a big sign of the market. We definitely need more people to start pushing that forward. But the problem is that even Sony themselves have a vested interest to make sure that games run on more hardware. I'm not saying PS4 is their focus now, but they're probably having conversations around certain games going, can we do a PS4 version or not? Even now, because there's still a market there, as you said earlier. So I think, PS5 baseline would be perfect, but in reality, I would prefer them to aim a little higher than that based on where we are in the PS5 generation. I'd say PS5 Pro should be the baseline that everyone should target. That level of spec, with maybe more RAM. That's my only weakness on the PS5 Pro, again with the PS4 Pro. Not enough RAM. 1.2 gig more is great, but I think to make it long legs, PS5 Pro could straddle the PS6 if it had more RAM. I think it will struggle because I think the PS6 will be at least 24 gigs, maybe even 32.
Yeah, I think it has to be 32 personally or more. But obviously they're not going to go to anything insane like 64 gigabytes. I guess a final thing I want to ask you, just as a fun parting question here, because it's something I've been thinking about lately. I guess GTA 6 will probably be the first game to fully maximize using the PS5. The Witcher 4 probably will as well do that. But do you really think, because this feels different than previous gens, I mean, I would say halfway through the PS4 generation, that thing was fully utilized. Uncharted 2 was one of those first games for PS3 that was like, whoa, I mean, this looks so different than Resistance 1. We've finally have we really done that yet? Has anyone maximized these consoles yet? Because they're getting better. They are looking better. And I will say the smoothness gets better every game. The smooth factor is awesome. But I don't know that I see a game yet where it's like, they finally, fully, and maybe the new Naughty Dog game, I forgot the name of it, that space one coming out, will do that. But we're 5 years in. Have we seen anything maximize the PS5 yet?
No, I don't think so. But I think that the thing about generations, the PS4 generation was more around the fact that it was the shift in industry skill set and the shift in industry process. So one of the big things about the PS4 generation, the Xbox generation, was PBR. So physically based rendering was the big shift. And that's what defined that. So the Order 1886 was the game, in my opinion, that defined that generation. I reviewed it at the time. I stand by that. That game still looks great now. If you up the res, if you improve the texture quality and put 4K textures in it, it would look even better. But fundamentally, what's there is amazing. And I think that this generation should have all been around ray tracing, or it should have been around completely seamless arcade cartridge style gaming where the SSD meant no loading, everything was instant. And the PS5 got close to that, but the reality is that because of the complexities of the market, it never had enough games that showed that. And I think that until we get something like GTA, which I think will do that, I think GTA will do, you can see it in the rendering, it's already doing more than just really good graphics, because we've had them for years, as you've said. Games look beautiful. PBR rendering was the big shift that made everything look great in the PS4 generation, although Remember Me, I think it was called, from a French studio. That was the game that really pushed PBR first on the PS3 and Xbox 360. But that was the beginning of it, and then everyone else started to do it. And that's what made the PS4 generation look completely different. Because
they learned the skills then and then did it on the next gen.
So the industry changed their tool set, and then everything became better because of it. This generation, we're doing everything exactly the same. It's still PBR. They've still got the same light solutions. They're still using fill lights and spotlights and these different area lights and all these functionalities that have always been there. They're using light probes and real-time GI. All those things are in the PS4. So that's why we're struggling. So what you've got is, as you said, the smoothness. So the two things they can add is we'll make it 60 FPS rather than 30, and we'll potentially make 4K using PSSR or whatever, FSR3. So I think that's what this generation's done. It's become this stopgap rather than this next leap forward. And I think that the next leap forward will be when we've got enough power to do things properly. And that, I think, is where GTA 5 comes in, 6 comes in. I keep saying GTA 5. GTA 6 comes in because GTA 6 is leaning more into just really, really, really amazing graphics. Let's be clear. The models, the lighting, the materials, they're absolutely top tier in terms of what they're creating. But it's also the physics, the animation, the deformation on the skin. They are going head and shoulders above everybody else. And we've seen that a little bit with Witcher 4. The skeletal system and the muscle system they've put in place, that deformation on the horse, they know what they're targeting. They're targeting the future. And I've said this for years. Physics is where we need to go into, other than ray tracing and sorting that out, which has its own benefits in terms of you don't have to do all the baking. So it's potentially path tracing and ray tracing has a huge benefit in the production pipeline, because it means that developers don't have to spend hours baking out stuff. They can move lights in real time and they can see what it looks like, so they can create and iterate much faster. But also, if they put that as a baseline, it means that every game will look great, but also would be faster to make. But the problem is that most times you take out cost in the pipeline, you just add it in somewhere else. So it never works that way. And I think GTA 6 is the game where they've spent years. I mean, I think GTA 6 is finished. In my opinion, GTA 6 is finished. They're spending a whole year polishing it. That's what they're doing. So this game will set the definition of the benchmark, but I don't think anyone else will achieve it again. I think, look at Red Dead Redemption.
For the foreseeable future, you mean? Like, that's going to be the benchmark, and it won't be till PS6 that we see that achieved again.
Yeah. You might see Naughty Dog achieve the same things, but and maybe a few other studios. You know, there's definitely studios out there. I'd love to see id Tech. This is a head scratcher for me. You've got one of the best studios in the world in terms of one of the best brains, best technology in Microsoft, and yet, for the love of God, they're making Halo using a Unreal Engine, which is a commercial decision. Everyone knows it is, rather than using id Tech. Why don't you take all your internal studios, put loads of money into that pot, and make them your lead platform? I mean, Sony have got Guerrilla and Decima. They've got Naughty Dog's own engine. They've got Insomniac. They've got all these internal tech teams that have got their own tech, and they let that spread and dissipate across all of their environments and studios. And I would love to see that happen, but the only other team that can do that is Rockstar. And you know, once they've made GTA 6, that GTA 6 is going to be the end of PS6 before they get GTA 7. So we're not seeing that unless they make a Red Dead Redemption 3. So I don't know. I think that GTA 6 is the new benchmark, but it will be in its place for a few years to come, in my opinion. It will set a benchmark that won't be beaten, or it will be equaled by a very few other teams in the PS5's lifespan, in my opinion.
Well, and I think it'll be GTA 6 as kind of being the thing that's the precursor to, like you say, the stepping stone to next generation consoles, which will fully realize the modern engines. But I have to say this too at the end. I didn't get a chance to bring it up. I have had developers also reach out to me and say Unreal Engine 5.6 works. They're like, whoa, something happened. I forgot what the quote was. It doesn't really matter because I can't tell you which game it is. But the person told me that they updated Unreal Engine 6 and their game tripled in frame rate. They're like, I don't know what they just did, but they fixed the CPU issue that Unreal Engine had. And so I also wonder if we're about to see an upgrade in graphics soon, because Unreal Engine 5 finally got finished, if you know what I mean. And that was probably holding back the efficiency of a lot of games.
I've said it, yeah. I mean, I think I said it a minute ago, and that doesn't surprise me. I haven't looked at 5.6 yet, but it's very inefficient. And again, it's the abstraction of, it's a classic, isn't it? You know, you try to please everybody, end up pleasing nobody. That's probably multi-platform engines. If you can't make it bespoke, then fundamentally that abstraction has cost. Somebody somewhere has taken the time to improve Lumen, the GI solution in their game. So the Nanite solution has been significantly improved. And Nanite's very expensive. Their virtual shadow maps are very expensive. I've done some testing myself, and it's a good example of, like, if it was nice and efficient, if it was less than a millisecond or 1.2 milliseconds, you'd use it. Because you get all these benefits. It's more efficient. It scales better. It doesn't pop. You don't get the cascade of shadow maps. All those benefits you get. But the problem is that you throw it in and you're halving your frame rate or more, then just going, do you know what? I'll give you 2 months. Go away. Make me a load of baked shadow maps. Do a cascaded shadow map solution. It's cheaper. It's quicker. And do you know what? If we do it properly, it looks almost as good as virtual shadow maps. The problem with the stuff in Unreal Engine, it was made to be efficient and good. And unfortunately, it was only good, not efficient. And I think that it sounds like they've fixed the efficiency problem. But it's a classic, isn't it? It's what we just said about it. It's everything. It's the classic of everyone nowadays. It's launch it now, release it later. That's where we are. And Unreal Engine is in that state. So I think I looked on the stream that they improved their Lumen and Nanites. That's probably what your friend's talking about, your developer's talking about, is it's probably far more
that, and also like just the CPU overhead issue, or like the CPU utilization was just better too. Like that's what blew.
Yeah, it doesn't multi-thread very well. It never did. It used a lot of single thread stuff running on, so it didn't hop and async work across threads. So maybe they've done work on that. I don't know. I'll have to look at it. It's probably going to be to do with that. The problem is that CPU is a massive cost for everything, and people. Animation, skinning, all of those things have a huge cost. So if they've improved their animation system and they've made their skinning system more efficient and their streaming system more efficient, i.e. it can hop across multiple threads and async work when renderers are going on with the GPU, so it can stack frames together. I mean, literally, if you can stack everything you do across 2 or 3 frames, you can triple your performance. So that's where some of the performance comes. And then you get latency, but you can hide latency by doing other things at the end of the pipe. So I'll be interested to see. You've got me inspired now. I need to have a look at it. I didn't look. So that's good information. Thanks.
I hope you do. So again, just a shout out to everybody. Look out for more developments on Unreal Engine in this month, because I, out of the blue, was just told, whoa, something's going on here where we might fundamentally have a better iteration of Unreal Engine finally. But if you do check that out, I'm sure you'll do a video on it. And if you do, people can find you at NXGamer, or please just tell everybody where they can find you. I know you're on several places.
So I'm on the Twitter, the X machines, whatever it may be. So that's at NXG. It's just N_X_G. That's on X. And then you can find me as NXG channel over on YouTube. And also, if you watch IGN stuff, I do a lot of all of their IGN performance reviews. So you can see me on there. So I've just put a Zelda Tears of the Kingdom Breath of the Wild one up. Went up yesterday. I think it was today. Actually today. So that's the first of the Switch stuff, and I've got lots of Switch 2 stuff coming up. So, but my channel is where I do most of my more deeper stuff, because obviously IGN is just focused on reviews fundamentally.
Okay. All right. Check them out. And also remember to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Moore's Law is Dead. Ring the bell button. Comment below. Like. share, and also subscribe to Broken Silicon on your podcast app of choice and give us a review. And then also join Moore's Law is Dead on Patreon. We have a Patreon. The lowest tier lets you ask guests like Michael here questions. You get die shrinks. A new one will be coming out next week. Another one came out looking at the evolution of how people cover NVIDIA products a week ago. That one was pretty popular with the fans. And you also get access to a Discord. You can submit voicemails now, like we played on air. There's a bunch of content and stuff there if you support us. Can't do this without our patrons. And then, before I start rambling, I should probably go get some more coffee. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, everybody, and have a good week. This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugad as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the about/support page in the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie Nosugada as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guests questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drew DeFool, Z-Jits, Daniel D, Deke, Nicholas Buckner, Aaron Close, Jan Rauner, Daniel Hyde, MJB1, GZ Ziggy, Toka, Compress AI Blocks, SNES Chalmers, Jem Ferreira, Valkamalev, Jensen Wang, Sarcastro, Icarus Risk, Evan Dingle, Hal Booma, Shredbird, Sammy Malas, The Boss Haas, Chrysantine, Jonathan, Amiable Chief, Neith Rizink, I Should, Jake Dude 23, Jake Martin, Zucky, Meat and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Gamers Unite, Travis Gooding, Mad, Zoot Suit Taylor, Greg, Michael McGee, Patty Cake, Stephen Coates, Mark Mitchell, Tommy, James Anderson, Mark Raidmaker, Cole Addict, Cameron, Henry Zhang, Wesley Sager, Michelle Pell, Win Wang, Hexapuma, Reginald Ari, Tikadam, Winstar, Corey Leonard, James I. Radar, Little Germany, John Swin, Shay, Milton, Melodic Warrior, Brett Jones, Chuck Glidden, Mac Daffy, Stephen Dick, Justin Bustle, Austin Haggerty, Joe Foot, Brian Scanlon, Harlan, Jason Ankema, Joseph Kelly, Slushba, Him Segung, Brian Wright, Sophos, 7771, The Forbidden Juice, Arby Racer, Alex Vega, Freedy, Michael Cozy, Thalo 215, Crystal Joe, Elbergun, Keekum Solarized 80, Sputnik Brian P, Hudat 42, 37 by 73, Cornstar 671, Penta Winter, Hal Richard, Omega Doge, AI Soldier 789, John Wick, Boomstick, Mr. Tiger, State Farm Snake, Hugo Ander Kiwi, Penguins Love AI, Porcelain Oats, Curry King 3, Nixus Mania, Sheriff Lotfi, Rahil Chibols, Smash Axley, Kevin Kuntz, Armand Vakatura, Karim El Masri, Callan, Reichel, Jonathan Harris, Kai Noosh, Kagani, Angel of Cake, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.